Our next guest speaker is Scott Rogers. He's Vice President of the Eau Claire Chamber of Commerce, and Vice President of Governmental Affairs, and then he's also our President for the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. And Scott, I'll let you take it from here.
All right. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate the opportunity to speak today and to join the rest of you that are on this call, and particularly to hear Rick's and Lisa's presentations. It's always appreciate hearing some vision and then seeing some specific progress that we're able to move forward in our state. I'm here representing the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition and some other things. In fact, I wear quite a few hats that I'll mention when it comes to passenger rail, but I think they're more complementary than it maybe appeared in that picture. One is, as Mark said, I'm a Vice President Governmental Affairs at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce. I also serve currently as chair of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition, which is a nonprofit education and advocacy group. I'm also one of the commissioners on the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission. And then I also serve the state of Wisconsin as the governor's appointee representing the private sector for the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, which is an 8-state commission that coordinates among the state DOTs and others for passenger rail service operation and expansion in the upper Midwest. I should also mention that personally and individually, I'm a member of Wisconsin Association of Railroad Passengers and the High Speed Rail Alliance. So appreciate the work of those organizations. And then my wife and I really like to travel by train. In fact, just this week, we took the Empire Builder round trip from La Crosse to Milwaukee for a quick sort of midweek spring break getaway and spent some money in hotels and restaurants and museums in those communities. I think John probably appreciates that as well. But really speaking to why is the Chamber of Commerce interested in passenger rail service? Our mission officially is to be the advocate of business, and our motto is our community is our business. And we see some real economic value for passenger rail service. In fact, the Chamber was one of the founders of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. And when we look at that, we know that the TCMC is getting ready to start. And some of the materials from the DOTs putting that together have looked at some of the economic impact that the annual share of Wisconsin's operating expenses from one of their publications is $3.6 million, but an annual economic benefit of $25 million. And one of the more persuasive studies, Lisa had mentioned this earlier, and Troy Hughes from the Missouri Department of Transportation presented some of this information to the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, the economic impact in Missouri that they have identified from the Missouri River Runner trains that operate between St. Louis and Kansas City. And as she mentioned, they've identified more than $22 million in tax revenue that comes out of all the economic activity. And in fact, the larger impact of over $208 million in economic activity from passenger rail. So it's these kinds of things and that sort of missing middle in transportation that has drawn the attention of chambers of commerce and other business organizations in our state, certainly Milwaukee and service to Racine, near Racine, and to Chicago with the Hiawathas has been recognized, but also some of my colleagues at other chambers in Wisconsin, and this was initially actually the Green Bay Chamber brought this idea up, and some of us got together and put together a business coalition for passenger rail here in Wisconsin that includes the Green Bay Chamber, the Madison Region Economic Partnership, which is a multi-county economic development organization, the Fox Cities Chamber, Metropolitan Milwaukee Association of Commerce, and our chamber here at Eau Claire. And just in sort of a limited time, we did put together a letter of support for the FRA applications that have been put in by Wisconsin DOT, Minnesota DOT, and the West Central and the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Coalition, Commission, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But we put a statement together really sort of looking at why expansion of rail passenger service in Wisconsin would be worthwhile for our economic future. That serving more cities will help us attract and retain businesses and talent, an environmentally friendly alternative to driving, economic growth opportunities, improving our quality of life, tourism, and adding resiliency to our transportation system. And in that kind of short notice, we did put together a letter, which you can't necessarily read all these companies, but we had a number of organizations and companies here in Wisconsin who signed on to the letter, several more business organizations, several of tourist organizations, and several of our institutions of higher learning. So this letter went along with the applications to FRA, so hopefully that will help Lisa and our friends at Minnesota DOT and others get successful FRA applications. I do want to talk a little bit about what's going on in West Central Wisconsin. When I moved here 21 years ago to Eau Claire, there was already a very active effort here to obtain passenger rail service. And it's this map that actually led to that. I don't know how well you can see it, but this is the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative, of which Wisconsin was a leader among other Midwest states for a future network, which we are finally starting to see some of this come to fruition. But if you look at West Central Wisconsin, a bus connection to Eau Claire was really how we were included. And so a number of our leaders in our community, in fact, the ones you see here have all passed on, but they had a long-term vision as part of our Momentum West Regional Economic Development Organization. The late Owen Ayers, Bill Leinenkugel, banker Ray Willoughby, said we need to look at how can we get passenger rail service to our area. And the coalition developed a vision statement talking about working with educational, business, and government organizations in our area to look at the economic value of passenger rail service as a long-term sustainable economic growth driver. Some of the reasons we push for that, we have some of the highest and fastest growing counties and cities in our community, in our state. We have 3 major state universities, plus our technical colleges, and a lot of commerce between West Central Wisconsin and the Twin Cities. Had some success in 2004. WisDOT commissioned a study that showed that some service through Eau Claire as part of the Chicago to Twin Cities route and what they called the Eau Claire West which is strictly Twin Cities to Eau Claire service, all would add economic value to the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative. And then the state rail plans of both Minnesota, which showed a Twin Cities to Eau Claire route as part of their state rail plan. And this is the current state rail plan for Wisconsin. And of course, Lisa mentioned that a new one is being drafted and will be out soon, includes service through our region. But getting on a map doesn't necessarily get you a train, as we all know. And so our coalition continued to research and look at things, developments around the country, such as Brightline, as the developments in Normal, Illinois, which has seen a lot of economic activity, the use of commissions and authorities to advocate or manage passenger rail service, and even alternatives to finding ways to operate them, like the Hartford line in Connecticut. And we, of course, all know about the success of the Hiawatha service with 7 daily round trips of a route under 100 miles. And we kind of look at ours as maybe the Hiawatha West, a little bit smaller version with the commerce between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities. And perhaps this is a way to look at getting going on initial service or at least serving the regional needs of our communities here. So the thing that led to more recently in 2021 was the formation of the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission, including the 3 counties along the line and the municipalities of Altoona, Eau Claire, Menominee, Baldwin, New Richmond, and Hudson, under provisions of the state statutes that allow municipalities, including counties, to come together and create transportation commissions. So as the commission got going, it also includes a number of ex officio members who are stakeholders in making the service possible, including Union Pacific Railroad over the tracks that we would operate, Wisconsin and Minnesota DOTs, Ramsey and Washington counties in Minnesota, our Regional Planning Commission, which also serves as our metropolitan planning organization. And then the 5 institutions of higher learning in our area are also ex officio members. So as we move forward into the FRA applications, we certainly sent a letter of support to WisDOT to advocate for and support the Madison, Milwaukee, Eau Claire, Twin Cities application they are putting in for the Corridor ID program. Here's a little closer look at that routing, and of course, Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, our region is part of that. And then the other thing we want to talk about today is the fact that we have actually submitted an application on behalf of the Commission to FRA to develop the Eau Claire to Twin Cities route as a separate application to look at discreetly why this is important to pursue under the corridor ID program. And we do see that as complementary and something that would work closely and be positive if both applications, the through route from WisDOT and the local route, are pursued. And as we look at that, there are really 5 things that are sort of unique about this. Actually, the first one isn't so unique, but they are meeting our transportation needs for our area. But we also want to look at things like competitive operator selection, a new model for using the direct for working with the host railroad, considering zero emission equipment, and the importance of transportation-oriented development and making a service successful. So when we talk about meeting transportation needs, those are really all of the things that all of us talk about when we talk about the value of passenger rail service, the benefits that we'd receive for unserved and underserved urban and rural populations, talent attraction, economic development, job creation, access to our universities, tourism, et cetera. And this is, of course, the region that we're talking about that we think would benefit from passenger rail service. But one of the things we're also talking about is a competitive operator selection. And as we have been working in our area, we were approached by the Association for Innovative Passenger Rail Operations. This is a trade association that primarily consists of 4 contract operators who do passenger rail service in the United States and in some cases around the world. You don't see their names on trains because they do it on behalf of commuter agencies and others. And also there are a construction company and a couple unions that are members of, they call this AI Pro. And just as an example, one of those organizations is Herzog, and this is a list of all the places they operate trains in the United States. And here are some of the other organizations: Keolis, Transdev, RAT, PVDev, and they have services they operate all over the country. And in fact, they do have one intercity line. It happens to be Herzog that operates it. And when the state of Connecticut decided to add service between New Haven, Hartford, and Springfield, they ended up deciding to go with Herzog on a competitive process to operate that service. In fact, that's a service that operates with Amtrak trains as well. But among the things that we want to look at there is whether a competitive operation by a contract carrier might either be more economical or effective than Amtrak, or at least to help with the expansion going on. If we're going to see the money that FRA is deploying, can Amtrak handle all of the service expansions? So we are working with AI Pro on this. And in fact, we have had a series of meetings with them, with the railroad, and with other providers that would need to come into play, including insurance equipment and others, as we've started to look at this. So a second thing that's unique about this service is something we call the direct access model with the railroad. We've been talking very closely with Union Pacific, which has put a lot of investment in this line, including PTC signaling, and has some capacity about the idea of negotiating access with the railroad at a competitive market rate to help them look at passenger service as a freight customer, frankly, to use excess capacity that would be available for the railroad. This is the idea that they may not need as much capital improvement to preserve freight capacity that they currently don't need. But when there's the Amtrak model with lower return on investment for the railroad, they want to make sure they're held whole with all their current freight capacity. So Union Pacific's been open to this. We think it's something that we want to look at with this service as well. And then because of the distance of the service, and when you look at the FRA criteria, they want to look at a lot of things like environmental benefits. And given the fact that it's less than 100 miles and could make multiple round trips, we are looking at things like the possibility of using zero emission equipment. Stadler, one of the manufacturers, Swiss-based, but with a manufacturing plant in Salt Lake City, has a equipment model called a FLIRT, which I don't have in front of me. That actually is an acronym, but it really includes a power module in the middle. It's in 2 to 4 car units. And that power module can be diesel, it can be overhead electric, it can be battery, and they've also now have the technology to use zero emission hydrogen fuel cells. And they have sold one set of equipment to an agency in California now. And given the length of service and the frequency, this might be something that would be a possibility, and we'd want to look into it. And then finally, transportation-oriented development. Rick talked about the importance of frequency. We talk about the importance of economic benefits to our communities. And one of the things that you can do is if you have sufficient frequency, you can look at transportation-oriented development that adds more benefits. So you maximize the development impact of transit on jobs and housing when you have sufficient frequency. Places like Denver Union Station. You support regional economic competitiveness by bringing in private investment to multiply the public benefits that you get from public investment. You create more equity, more access opportunity for all, and then you can also see potentially increased ridership and revenues. So we see things like Brightline. So these are major cities, but there are smaller cities as well that benefit. Normal, Illinois on the Chicago-St. Louis line, which is a mid-sized city with a state university, has seen significant economic activity and benefits from transportation-oriented development in that smaller Midwest city where you see lots of activity around their station as well. And then it's not just the economic activity, but the benefits and access. This is from AARP talking about how giving older adults who want to live independent lives and don't want to travel as much get some benefits from transportation-oriented development. So we have put our application in. It went in officially to FRA on Thursday. And just like WisDOT and MnDOT and others will be waiting to find out if we are successful. But these are some of the organizations you can see on this list. MnDOT and WisDOT, Ramsey and Washington counties, and others have put in, and Union Pacific Railroad have supported our applications. So we hope we'll be able to look forward to a positive decision and be able to take that federal grant and so start pursuing some of these things like the transportation benefits and including, as Lisa said, looking at what is the return on investment when public dollars do start going into these investments, into these services. So really, we've looked at it from the Rail Coalition, really 3 options for getting passenger rail service to our area or access to it. Frequent regional service, through service from Chicago and Milwaukee, and then also throughway shuttle connections to existing Amtrak services such as Menominee and Eau Claire to Toma. We already heard about the Interstate 41 services to Green Bay, and we would like to see as one of the first steps service to Toma so that people could actually buy a ticket from Eau Claire and Menominee and go to Amtrak services to Milwaukee and Chicago and other places. So it's our hope that in a few years, instead of looking at something like this, when those of us in West Central Wisconsin are planning a trip to the Twin Cities, we can be using our time more productively when we're on a train. When students are coming to Menominee, like this picture from the 1940s, that they can be using modern trains, that we can be using trains for family time. And then bringing tourists and other visitors to our area for economic development. And for those areas like Chippewa Falls or River Falls, where there's a state university, that we can be emulating what's happening in the eastern side of the state or in California with direct connections from our rail line to offline cities. So here's a little bit of information, contact information about the Rail Coalition. If you go to our website, we do have some meeting videos posted there. We actually had Rick and Lisa and Arun Rao from Amtrak in January talking about further development. So if you want to learn more about some of the things we're up to, you can go to our website. I have my email address here too, if you want to follow up with me as well on anything. So that's a little bit about what's going on in West Central Wisconsin and how we hope to become part of the larger expanding network of passenger rail in Wisconsin and the rest of the country. So if there's any question, I'd be glad to answer them, but we appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you, Scott.
One of the questions that came up earlier was, you know, the congestion and other things. When we were putting our application together, and we have a team here of current and former transportation professionals in our region that have helped put this together. One of the things we found out is that there's parts of our corridor between here and the Twin Cities that 32% of the traffic is trucks now. And that's increasing with all the, so another reason to have an alternative to being able to get to the cities other than driving.
Okay, this question comes from Ethan Johnson. He wants to know, can you describe in a little more detail the governance model for the proposed standalone West Central Wisconsin service, and would the coalition contract would be with a service provider?
Governance is certainly one of the questions. We need to work very closely with WisDOT and MnDOT and even Ramsey County Regional Rail Authority, who owns St. Paul Union Depot. Just how would it be governed and managed? We do know that in other regions, for instance, in California, they have the joint powers authorities that operate each of their lines. In the Northeast, you have the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority. We do hope to see both through services to Chicago as well as a regional rail line here. So it would require close cooperation with Wisconsin DOT, Minnesota, and others. Of just how would you structure this? Would the commission continue to operate and be the sponsor of the service? Would at some point we turn those over to WisDOT? That's really the reason to do some of these studies, to look at what should the governance be and what would be the best way to operate it. If you go to some places that we've had expanding passenger rail service, so just stand on the platform in Fullerton, California, and you're going to see Metrolink trains, you're going to see Amtrak California trains, you're going to see Amtrak long distance trains. And so using the same asset more effectively for different kinds of trains, one of the things you got to figure out is how would that all work? We do foresee that part of the model is that you would contract with one of those private carriers. They would bid on the service, that you would bring in the communities and something called the Build America Bureau that USDOT has to foster financing of transportation or development. So you bring all these parties together, you bring WisDOT into it, you look at what is the right way to govern this. And we don't have all those answers, but we think we need to be innovative and pursue all of those things. So that's kind of a long answer, but those are all things you can innovate and look forward to doing.
A question that came in the chat box, and this is from David Wheeler, and he would like to know, do you foresee any other railroads besides Union Pacific Railroad taking an interest, with passenger rail? And I guess one example, he said perhaps a state operator like Quadco, perhaps, and wouldn't necessarily have to be with the Rail Coalition.
So the Union Pacific's role in this would be as the host railroad, as the provider of the infrastructure, but not the operator. And so and Rick Harnish has talked about this, and I don't know if you want to even jump in on it, but right now we have a model where Amtrak has forced access. And I do believe the railroads believe that Amtrak does not adequately compensate them for access to their lines. And that is why the railroads tend to want a lot of infrastructure improvements, because once the passenger service starts, there may be increases in frequency, or the railroad may have more freight service that it wants to operate, and they need to be made whole. This concept is that you are, I guess, renting or purchasing access from the railroad that already exists. And they look at you pay them a higher fee for that, but then you have less capital up front that is needed. Now they have applied this in some areas, other areas with commuter lines. And it is a new model that we think is worth pursuing. And if it's successful, it could be applied perhaps with other railroads that they may be interested in that, but something we want to pursue and see if we can make it work.